Speaking out of turn, think of me as the nun in 4th grade. Anyone who doesn't choose to obey some simple basic courtesies of listening to everyone and letting everyone be heard and answer questions, we will ask you to leave. We're here tonight to engage in a good conversation and a good dialogue with one another, and that can only be done if we're doing it respectfully and peacefully. With that, I'm going to ask for our projectionist to begin the DVD of Truthland. We do have copies available for you when you... Dennis is an attorney with an extensive background as well, working both for Norse Energy and other energy providers in our community. And then at the near end of the table is John Hokel. He is the president of Lenape Resources. I'll ask you to, if you would like, to come up to one of the 2 mics and ask your question there. That way the people who are videotaping will have a clear record of your question. And I will ask you, when you ask your question, please identify yourself so we know that for the video and also how to address you. First question.
Sharon, question for you first.
Sir.
Do they need the lights to be this bright for purposes of filming, or could they dim them just a bit?
I'll ask our expert in the back of the room.
That's where it has to be. Will that work? That's better. Thank you. It's just nice to see the questioners.
Why don't we just do it all in the dark?
We're trying to shed some light on the subject. Hopefully we'll accomplish that tonight.
First question. This gentleman here. The mic is right there. And identify yourself, please.
My name is Jim Holston. My name is Jim Holston, H-O-L-S-T-U-N. Now, I don't know how far you guys want to stand behind this movie. One of the more interesting points in the movie was when Ms. Depew says, one of the more interesting points in the movie is when Ms. Depew says, fracking fluid contains just things that I have around my house. Okay? I wonder if you guys would make the same claim. And I looked around my house for the hydrochloric acid, the toluene, the benzene. I couldn't find any. Is fracking fluid just regular stuff like laundry detergent that we find around the house? Is that all that's there in fracking fluid?
Scott?
Go ahead, Scott. Yes.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? First of all, let's be clear that there is no pathway for whatever fluids we are using from the frac zone to the groundwater. That's number one to understand. Second, what we're using is highly diluted, over 5 million gallons of water and a few thousand gallons of really basically 4 general compounds. One, as the gentleman said, is hydrochloric acid. Okay, what do we use hydrochloric acid for in the process? That's really one of the first things we pump down the well, and the purpose of that is to open up the perforations that we have made to communicate with the formation. What happens to that hydrochloric acid? It immediately breaks down in contact with the calcium carbonate in the rock. The resulting reaction is water, calcium chloride, and a small amount of carbon dioxide. Hydrochloric acid is consumed and broken down immediately. No danger whatsoever, even if it could get back to the surface. Second of all, we use a friction reducer. The friction reducer, the most common one, is called polyacrylamide. The reason we use a friction reducer is so that we have to use less horsepower when we're pumping the fluid down the wellbore. What's one of the most common uses of polyacrylamide? Any of you had an ultrasound? It's the gel that they rub on your skin so that they can do the ultrasound and with less friction. It's a friction reducer, a lubricant basically. Very harmless, inert compound. The third thing that's used is a biocide, a small amount of biocide, often something called glutaraldehyde. Not much different than using chlorine in your pool, very diluted. It is also consumed in contact with the formation in its purpose to disinfect the water. And the last one that's used is ethylene glycol scale reducer, which we all use that. We know we have that in our cars. So those are the basic 4 things that are used. Very small amounts of other things sporadically used, but those are the 4 main ingredients.
Why don't you talk about the other things?
That is basically, go to fracfocus.org and look them up, and if you have a question about any that are being used, I'd be glad to address those, but they're very, very few used.
Excuse me, sir, you can ask your question when you go to the mic. This gentleman's at the mic first.
Okay, it's my understanding that the hydrographic industry has an exemption from the Superfund site law, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. If what you claim is true, that this is all innocuous household materials, which many people have proven otherwise, by the way, if that were really true, why do you need an exemption from all those environmental protections, especially the Superfund site law? So it strains one's credulity, any thinking person, that you would need these exemptions, which, by the way, none of us here have. If we did anything that purportedly you folks are doing, we'd be in jail. So please explain to me why you need this exemption where no one else is eligible for that at all.
I'll take a stab at that one to start with. I wish you could come back up and explain what exemption you're talking about, because we have no exemption.
Halliburton will poll.
Come and explain.
We have more than 3 exemptions: the Clean Air, the Clean Water, and Superfund. So
You explain what you mean by exemption.
you are not held accountable to those laws.
Yes, we are. All 3 of those.
If you have a question, please approach the
I
mic.
can't answer a question unless you explain exactly what your concern is. We are regulated by the Clean Water Act, we're regulated by the Clean Air Act, and we're regulated by the Superfund Act. I can't answer it any more clear than that, I'm
So
sorry.
can you put that in writing?
Sure. I'll give you a piece of paper when you walk out.
Sir, you don't, excuse me, you don't need it in writing. You heard the EPA. The EPA engaged in a series of investigations. What do you think the basis was for the EPA's authority to investigate? They were investigating under those various different acts.
We have a question here.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Leslie Nickerson. I'm a graduate student at UB. I had a question. You just told us that there was no chance that the chemicals that were used in the fracking were going to contaminate the environment or the water. And I'm just curious about some of the 8 violations that have actually gone on Shelley Depue's property, in particular Depue 2H, 6H, and 8H. And I was wondering about, especially on the 4th of March 2011, when they were cited for failure to notify DEP of pollution incident. And then again, on the same day, 4th of March 2011, failure to properly control or dispose of industrial or residual waste to prevent pollution of the waters of the Commonwealth. Because that sounds to me like the waters were actually being polluted by those chemicals.
When I was talking about the fracking fluid, I'm talking about the fracture stimulation process. There's always a risk of surface operations if you spill on the surface. However, the pads are designed so that they're completely lined, so that anything that's spilled on the pad that doesn't escape the pad, there's no chance of contamination.
And the other thing in your comment, in those violations, I didn't hear anything that you said that caused any area of concern, because a violation would have had an act. Typically, the violations you mentioned sounded more like administrative violations. The report, for failure to report something, handled it properly, they didn't report it. That's a violation. A lot of times, the administrative side is still reported as a violation. The proper disposal, you'd have to tell me what the material was. I mean, you got to understand. I mean, if there was 2 drops of oil on the ground under a truck, it ends up having to be reported. So, sure.
Yeah, actually, one of the other violations that I found here is that on the 11th of March 2011, this was Depue 6H, pit and tanks not constructed with sufficient capacity to contain pollutional substances. So that sounds like things are going to be able to get out.
No, what it's telling you is the construction design didn't meet their specific requirements. Had there been an issue with pollution or something escaping, that would have said that. All they're talking about is the design parameters. There's no indication that any wrong was done or anything happened.
Failure to properly control or dispose of industrial or residual waste.
What I'm saying is if there was a pollution incident, it would have said pollution caused by. What you're reading to me, I'm just telling you, because I don't have what you have in front of me, I'm listening to you. What I'm hearing are predominantly administrative type actions. So,
yeah, failure to properly store, transport, process, or dispose of a residual waste. Site conditions present a potential for pollution to waters of the Commonwealth. These are like actual quotes from the site.
It didn't, but no, what they're saying is, this is the protocol that says that state regulation and local regulation is good. These were things that were noticed by the regulators, that were corrected by the industry, so that the things that you're worried about don't happen.
And how are they corrected?
You'd have to read the rest of the report, because if you go into those report dockets, they will show what's cited and how the operator corrected them. Because that's part of the process. If something goes wrong, it's reported, we're cited, we correct. If it's not corrected, it goes into an additional citation and issue. So, I mean, you have to follow through what's going on. That's.
Okay, and I have just one other question, and then I'll free up the mic. There's somebody waiting behind me. And the last one that I have is that on the 20th of March 2012, DEPU 8H, the DEP reported a bubbling annulus, and I was wondering if you could tell us more about what that is.
Without seeing the entire document, knowing what the annulus was, or what the bubbles were, what was causing the bubbles?
Like, can you explain what that is?
Well, as you saw in the drawing, there was multiple annulus. There's an outside annulus, and it goes into the inside casing. Each space between the steel and the next steel casing is considered an annulus. The last one is between the steel casing and the crown. So those are the annulus. Depending on where the gas is bubbling from, would give you an indication of whether or not there's an issue with it.
One thing I can tell you is I've listened to Shelley 3 times now. She's usually present, and unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, but I listened to her most recently Tuesday in Syracuse, and she has only positive things to say about the 4 wells that have been drilled on her property. She's had no incidents that have caused her any concern. She's been very pleased with how the operators of the wells have treated her, taken care of any of her questions, and she's not aware of any problems whatsoever herself.
Rita, before we get to your question, let me just make sure, gentleman 4 rows back, did you have a question? You had your hand up before? If you want to go to the mic, he had raised his hand first.
2 comments. It destroys land values. Mineral rights, it destroys land values. Nobody wants to live on top of this industrial activity out in residential areas. There are heavy trucks coming to develop it, and they continue to take the oil or gas out. I could go into this longer, but I know mineral rights can be with the surface rights. Sometimes they're separated. And if you have the mineral rights, you might be getting a royalty. But the 12.5 or 20% you get will probably be less, become zero as far as your value, because the price of the land you have will go down. Now, if you just own the mineral rights, you'll probably do all right, but if you've got land. Then my second comment is injection wells. And supposedly, when you have a brine, when you have gas coming out, you get gas, oil, and brine. And as I understand it, 25% of that brine stays under the surface, 75% comes out. And they're using 100,000 gallons a day, 3 million gallons to make, say, a well at 8,000 feet. But anyways, you've got to do something with this. Now, this brine has hydraulic fracturing acid, and the acid is cancer-causing. It's got hydrogen chloride in it, among other things, boride. So there's a big someplace, they're drilling injection wells, and they're putting this brine, 75%, back down in the ground, supposedly below the water table. But, you know, there's a certain amount of risk there. But one sidelight, I happen to know a person from Baker Hughes, and he's a manager, and he's working in this particular oil well gas town. He lives 30 miles away. He doesn't want to live near it. You need to have the CEOs of these oil companies and the managers living on top of some of these things, and then maybe, you know, show some safety. Thank you.
No questions, sir? Thank you. Rita, your question?
Okay, I have two questions and then a comment. So my first question is for all three panelists, and I'd like to know, in your professional opinion, what you think the most dangerous part of fracking is.
Tell me so.
Is it,
No, on my side?
Yeah, go ahead.
I always get the hard stuff. I think the exposure to any sort of incidents is the highest during the mobilizations, during moving the materials around. Once everything's on site, once the pumping starts, once everything's handled, the likelihood of something happening is very small. The control methods, the backup methods are pretty solid. So I think, you know, the most dangerous, I've been doing it for 30 years, I don't see a lot of danger in the activity at all, but I think the most exposure to risk is during the movement of everything. And most of it's during, you know, companies I've worked for, the biggest issues we've had are with auto accidents.
Yeah, just to echo John, you know, my company, we've drilled literally hundreds of wells in this state, and the most serious incident we've ever experienced was just what John was describing. It wasn't the drilling process. It was simply moving a set of stairs over the trailer. It was basically what they refer to as the doghouse, where people stay during the drilling process. And unfortunately, there was a fatality associated with that. But if you think about it, if you start saying, well, then the drilling is inherently dangerous, you start breaking it down to say, well, what is there out there that we do every day that we couldn't do any longer? You know, people die in cars. There are a lot of different things that happen. I think the important message in this is what you do safely, you exercise proper caution, you have a proper regulatory scheme. And I find it, you know, listening to the movie, and even some of the gentleman's comments earlier, it's unfortunate. I realize a lot of people here have a firm belief that there's a Halliburton loophole and that this industry isn't subject to regulatory oversight. You know, I pulled out one time, just to give you an example, because this question's come up before, and I just want to give people maybe an idea, just in New York State, under the current scheme, what regulatory oversight we're engaged in on a regular basis to get a permit and to drill a well. We have oversight, we have oversight from the DEC. They also have responsibility for enforcing Clean Air and Water Acts and the Safe Drinking Water Act, because they're a regional administrator for the EPA under those acts. As I told the gentleman earlier, but he still doesn't seem to listen, the EPA's attempt that you heard referenced earlier when the administrator was being interviewed there in the movie to enforce actions in Pavilion, Dimmick, and in Texas and Fort Worth, all involved their authority that's derived under those acts. So if the fiction were true, they wouldn't have the authority to engage. But in addition to that, just to give you some flavor for what other regulatory oversight exists, we have to deal with the Army Corps of Engineers on wetland issues, the New York State DOT on road entrance and boring permits, county and town officials on road entrance and boring permits, New York State Public Service Commission on our pipelines, the DEC on our compressor operations again, the Susquehanna River Basin Commission or other regional commissions on water withdrawal and consumption. The DEC certifies all sites for fluid disposal in New York State. You have to have an authorized plan in place before you're allowed to get a drilling permit. You deal with the New York State Office of Parks and Recreation and Historic Preservation. You deal with the DEC Division of Waters for stormwater pollution prevention and SWEPS plans. We deal with the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets for soil preservation issues and any irrigable land. We deal with the EPA, as I said before, the Clean Air Act in terms of emissions from compressors. And the list goes on and on. I limited it when we did this to putting it on one piece of paper so I could read it, when it was up on the big screen, so I copied that particular slide. But I think the point in all this is proper care and diligence on location is the key element. And that applies whether you have a dairy farm or any commercial operation at all. I think the key thing to remember is that unlike mining and lumber and a lot of other activities, we're typically there for a matter of a few weeks drilling a well. And then we move on and we restore the land. And one of the things I'll point out to you is you can go out and get endorsements from the landowners that we've dealt with, and we're literally drilled hundreds and hundreds of wells in this state, and they will tell you how pristine the land is and how nicely it is returned. So I think there's a lot of misperception out there. So that was a long answer, and I apologize.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to follow. So you think the biggest danger would be for people at a drill rig to not follow regulation?
I think the nature of any quasi-industrial process is whether you're driving vehicles, whether you're moving heavy equipment, you've always got the risk that you have to be careful. And it applies whether it's the oil and gas drilling industry or any variety of other industries. The point is, this industry is one of the most heavily regulated I've ever observed. And this state in particular has a very high degree of regulation. So there's a lot of misperception out there. What I'm saying is, I don't overly worry about it from day in and day out any more than I worry each time I get in my car and drive to work.
I think clearly the most dangerous part of the entire operation is really not unlike a construction site, is the moving of the equipment. You've got a lot of heavy machinery. You have pipes. People can get their fingers pinched. They can fall off a ladder. Basic construction type of incidents is really where we find the majority of incidents.
Right. I just have one more question. Thank you so much. I have one more question and a comment. So my second question is, while I realize that there can be naturally occurring methane migration in water from methane pockets close to the surface, biogenic methane, I'm wondering what your response is to the Duke University study that came out in May of last year that associated methane in drinking water wells with methane located miles beneath the surface, the same methane that is being drilled for, essentially. So what are your comments on the Duke University study that actually correlates this thermogenic methane with the methane that has been found in people's drinking water near fracking sites?
Well, I can address that. Actually, first of all, they had no baseline testing, unfortunately. So they didn't really know whether they found a correlation where they found slightly more methane in water wells closer to drilling sites, but they had no causation effect because they didn't do baseline testing to see what happened before the drilling. Second, and in fact, in Otsego County, which has been really little publicized, they actually found the opposite effect. They found that there was less methane in the water wells close to drilling sites. Most people don't pick up on that, but if you read the report, it's very clear. Second of all, thermogenic methane is present in any of the shales in that area.
Close to the surface?
Absolutely, because all of those are Devonian shales. The water wells are drilled into the Devonian shales, so they all have thermogenic methane. And what they were trying to say is that they found one sample that they thought they could correlate carbon isotopically to Marcellus, but in fact they made an error. It's been highly criticized. It was not Marcellus gas. It was in fact from the Lock Haven Formation, which is also Devonian shale, which is a shallow formation in the area. It was from that, and the DEP has done extensive testing. They have never found any evidence whatsoever of Marcellus gas fingerprint in any water wells. Be very clear about that.
Okay, just my comment is that across the state, there's really been a citizens movement against fracking. There are thousands of people that oppose fracking, hundreds of citizens groups that have formed in opposition to fracking. And just sitting here today, I wonder how many people in this room are really buying into the propaganda. I mean, the citizen groups can't afford million-dollar commercial campaigns. They can't afford giving campaign contributions to our elected officials. They can't afford any of that stuff. So I think we really need to be questioning what is the bottom line and who really has something to gain and who's telling the truth and who's lying. Thank you for your time.
I guess my comment in response to that, Rita, your particular organization is funded in part by the Park Foundation, which has some pretty deep pockets and a pretty strong agenda against using any fossil fuel.
I'm talking about citizens groups. Citizens grassroots groups is what I'm talking about.
Let me just say one thing in response to that, and also this gentleman's earlier comment about not living in the area where the drilling is. I spent 20 years in Oklahoma, in Texas. I lived in neighborhoods where they were producing oil and gas wells within the neighborhood limits. We never had any problems whatsoever with those wells. As far as you're talking about land values going down, well, I can tell you, in the 10 years that I've been away from Oklahoma, my house in Oklahoma has risen 2.5 times. I don't know of a place in New York where that would have happened. And I had wells in my background. Everywhere I've worked in this industry, it has been well accepted. Industry has worked closely with the neighborhoods. They are part of the neighborhoods. They work as a team, and they are well liked and respected. The problem in New York really is that this is an area that is relatively new to the intersection with the oil and gas industry. And I think over time, as we drill here and show that it can be done responsibly, the sentiment will change. I can tell you I sat on a panel with Truthland down in the Dimmock area just a few weeks ago, and overwhelmingly the people in the audience, unlike what I find in New York typically, overwhelmingly very pro-industry, having very good experiences with the oil and gas industry.
If I can, I'll bring it a little closer to home. The gentleman's comment about company CEO types ought to live where they drill. I live in East Aurora. I've served on our school board for the last 9 years. We have 2 hydrofrac wells on our high school property. The school drilled those, not with any involvement of mine, 20 years ago. I've served only in the last 9 years on the school board. So my 4 children went through that school system. That school used those wells, the natural gas and water that was obviously coming out of systems that were located nearby. And so I did live exactly where I preach. So the point in all this is there are a lot of scare tactics out there. It's unfortunate. But the bottom line, this industry has an excellent safety record. And the purpose of this is to give you an opportunity to hear it. There obviously are folks in the audience that may not have an interest in that, and that's unfortunate. But we're going to try and get the point across to those who would like to listen.
We have a question over here. I know you're in line, but there's been a couple folks who haven't had the chance to ask questions yet. So we'll let everyone ask their first rounds, and we'll come back for take 2s.
Okay, I'm Amy Lund, and actually, I have just a point of clarification for the very first question, which I didn't feel was answered. He asked about the statement that was used a number of times in the film, in her revealing the truth. Things were diluted into very simple answers, and the one using the statement that household products and it's as clean as that or as safe as that. And as many people know, there is no regulation on our personal products and hygiene products, and the EPA for household products is so far behind on what is sold on the shelves, and the FDA. So I don't find that very truthful. That's a statement by omission, and I don't feel like you answered his question. And within the film, unlike Gasland, I felt like this film revealed concepts, such a simplistic manner that they were going for the lowest common denominator, and she was just saying, well, I'm happy with that, the proposed pen. It got into, how, if you wanted to portray a truthful story about it, I just found it very demeaning, because I came here to see if you actually had some factoids that would be relevant, and that film did not relate them. And she certainly did not do that in her scripted case. And I'm kind of sad for that, because you have an opportunity.
Did you find a lot of science in Gasland?
Yeah, and actually her statement over and over saying, oh, and I background and credentials as she did, as many. And I just found this, it felt demeaning to me to watch this film, and I'm sad because here was the opportunity. And it's
Well,
nothing.
you also have the opportunity here to ask questions of people that have over 100 years experience in this industry. So you can choose,
Okay,
can I finish? You can choose to either listen to their explanations. There's a very competent people here, or you can choose to question it, which some people will do, because we represent the industry. But you see that you end up in sort of a...
something that's going to be distributed all over, like it's representing your story. And I found the way in which the story was made to be really irrelevant because her answers were so trite. They were unfounded, and she just kind of kept checking on the list.
You seem to be more concerned about her answers. Maybe what you should
But
have
that was
done...
the film.
Maybe
That was
not. Let me
what it was
finish.
about.
What you might have considered doing is listening to the experts that she spoke to
I
and
did.
hearing what they had to say.
Amy, what I'll do, I'll direct you to the Energy in Depth website. I'll direct you to a lot of other websites where you can find the kind of factual information in depth that you need.
That's fine.
I'm glad to ask you to do that.
I think I was very specific about the 4 chemicals that are used.
Yeah, but that wasn't his question.
I think,
His question was about her comment.
and the fracfocus.org will give you specifics on every well that's drilled in.
And we have a question here.
Yes, when I came in, one of the comments that was made that there are not grassroots organizations that are supportive of gas drilling in New York. And I actually happen to belong to a gas drilling, natural gas grassroots organization that represents over 800,000 acres in upstate New York. So when you say that that's not the case, in the town that I belong to, there's over 28,000, almost 29,000 acres. Within that town, only 400 of those acres within the village represent people that are semi-opposed to gas drilling. Of that, I pay taxes on a good majority of that property within that village. So when you tell me that there aren't grassroots organizations that support gas drilling, I have to say you're sadly mistaken. The JLC, NY, and the Unitio Landowners Associations, and all of the other landowners associations across New York State that represent the farmers and the people that work hard to support your property so that you can look out and see pastoral, picturesque views, that's us. We need this to happen in our state. We need our own energy here in New York State, not to be shipped in from Pennsylvania and someplace else, because you want to have your property not touched. Who do I represent? Myself. I'm just a landowner.
We have a question over here.
Oh, Kimberly Moore. I'm a landowner in Otsego, New York.
Question over here.
Hi, my name is Ben Nelson. I work for the Public Accountability Initiative. I have short questions for Mr. Holbrook and Dr. Klein. I also have a question about the making of the film. I'd expected to be able to speak with Shelley Depew tonight. She was advertised. I understand she's not here.
Shelley did arrive. Shelley was here. Got a phone call from her kids back in Susquehanna County. There was a major storm that rolled through. 2 trees down on the property. I saw her, I shook her hand. She went to the ladies' room, grabbed a can of pop, and hit the road.
That's fine.
And she apologized.
That's totally fine. As long as the video is going to be on Energy in Depth's website, I'd hope that maybe they can answer my question on their website. I'd also appreciate it if they post the whole video. I know a lot of times they're just clips.
The whole video is on YouTube.
I mean the video is on. That's all. Okay.
Joe says yes.
My question is about the interview in the film with Jim Marston of the Environmental Defense Fund in Austin. He was the man of the Petroleum Association of America, which funds Energy in Depth. These are his comments. You can find them on EDF's website, edf.org. I don't know if they're true. I reached out to him, emailed him. I haven't gotten a response. But since the funding of this film by Energy in Depth is made clear in the film, I'd like to know if it was entirely clear to all the participants exactly what they're participating in. So that's a question for Energy in Depth to answer at a later date.
Joe was here from Energy in Depth. I don't know that he'd be able to answer that
Was
question
he
for you
involved
tonight,
in
but the two of you, maybe you can swap contact information and he can get the information that you need.
Well, I'm a big fan of your website, so if you could answer the questions in a public forum rather than just to me, that'd be great. Really quick question for Mr. Holbrook. Your company, as far as I know, recently moved its headquarters for the top executives to Houston. Are you still going to be based in the Western New York area? Just given your earlier comments about living next door, are you moving to Houston with the CEO and other executives?
I have not committed yet. In fact, there was an article that appeared in connection with this presentation in Art Voice that referenced options that I had been granted. Those options happen to relate to incentivize people, unfortunately now, to leave New York State and move back to Houston. I say unfortunate. It's unfortunate for those of us. I'm a nearly 60-year resident of this state. I've raised my family here. We moved the company here and the corporate headquarters here to Blaisdell, New York, a little over 4 years ago. We drew on the University of Buffalo and their geology department and the expertise that we found there, among other places, to bring people in. We had over 70 people employed by the company. The vast majority of them were in New York State. And now we've, as a result of 4 years of delay, we're down to less than 20. And yes, that is correct, that the plans are now to shift the U.S. headquarters out of New York and move it down to Texas.
Just a real brief question for Dr. Klein.
I guess that sir would like to see all the jobs leave the state, but anyway, go ahead.
Just for Dr. Klein, could you tell me what percentage of frac fluid is recoverable after drilling, not for household use, not for drinking, but for reuse? You know, given the amount of water usage, what is the amount of percentage that's reused typically?
Well, let me start with how much comes back. It varies by the shale formation and the location within the shale. In the northern part of the Marcellus Trend, for instance, we get probably only 20% of what we inject back. So out of the 5 million gallons, you're only going to get perhaps 1 million back. The majority of that comes back in the very first few months on flowback, because it's basically the frac fluid that we have injected is coming back with the gas. The remainder is imbibed into the formation and held there for geologic time. So that water that comes back is collected in tanks. No pits will be allowed in New York. It will be directed into closed tanks. And basically, we are able to reuse over 90% of that water by a very slight amount of filtration. And we take that water to the next site and mix it with the other fresh water and just continually reuse it. A small amount of the more concentrated form has to be further treated. It can be done by a variety of treatment processes, commonly distillation, or it can be, the water can be purified and then again reused, or it can be taken to injection wells in Ohio. We have no plans for any injection wells in New York, and none that I'm aware of in Pennsylvania either.
So 20% can be recovered from the ground, 90% of that amount can then be reused?
Yes.
Okay, so... I mean, that's
90 plus, I think it's actually
90 plus.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what I read in the paper you presented to the New York State Assembly, 30% plus or minus 10%. However, there was also a piece after a public forum in Cortland, New York, last October, when, I'm quoting from the Cortland Standard, one audience member asked what happens to the water treated with hydrofracking fluid. The client said 90% of the water in hydrofracking is used again in drilling. Would you say that gives a misimpression of how much total can be retrieved? Would you say that...
Is that just what I said? I guess I'm confused. I mean...
90% of all the water initially used versus 90% can be reused up to 20% retrieved from the ground.
90% of what comes back is reused. The rest of it never comes back.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
I just want to give you a little benchmark. It's 8:30. We have the room until 9. We have 7 more people in line now. When you ask your questions, just be mindful of that to make sure we get all the questions answered. Okay? You next, sir?
Okay, you fellows have told us that your industry is very heavily regulated and that you have tremendous oversight from the DEC, the EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, New York State Department of the Environment, and so forth and so on. Okay, one of the important factors, the important factors of regulation and oversight are 1, inspection, and 2, enforcement. Okay, now, if you look at our mining industry and the BP Gulf catastrophe, the accidents we've had in both of those fields, I think they have uncovered that inspection and enforcement in both of those fields has been abominable. And these were the factors behind those accidents. Now, if your industry is putting gas wells, thousands of these around the country, is our government going to have enough inspectors and enough law enforcement officials to make sure each and every one of those wells is constructed properly? Okay, because the well you showed in the film, rather that piece of it showed in the film that they put the dynamite in and it worked so beautifully and so forth, how do we know that each and every one of the wells will be as well constructed as the one you showed in the film?
I'll take a stab at a simple answer to it, what I think is a difficult question. I think the best answer to your question is the historical record in New York. We've drilled thousands of wells, and we've had really no reportable major incidents. That's a clear indication of how the system works. The other thing is that in any business, regardless of what it is, you understand that following the protocol design and the regulatory structure is necessary so that you get the next chance. Most companies don't take the risk of stepping outside the rules and requirements because that's what we have to do, and that's the proper thing to do. So it may not give you the exact answer you want, but that's my simple answer to the question.
One thing I would just add, I agree with what John has said. The people you have to go to the next time for a permit are the same people that are going to be ultimately finding you in violation. And if you want to be successful in getting a subsequent permit, then you better do it right the first time. They do not take kindly if those people who granted you a permit find that you haven't complied with the terms. So common sense enters into a certain element of this. The question that I think you're also getting to that I've heard raised before, I just wanted to add to what John said, is that the question has come up periodically. Well, we understand the DEC has cut back on its budget. They've laid off staff. You know, with the austerity that many of us are experiencing, there's a lot of downsizing. How do we know the DEC will have adequate inspectors to go out and do their job? And the answer is really pretty basic once again. The DEC will limit the number of permits that they issue to that which they can handle, which includes their inspection. So the challenge for us as an industry right now is they have taken a step back. And so they're not geared right now, and I fully expect that when the rules come out, there's going to be a very slow and gradual process engaged in issuing permits under the new rules. What we hope will occur is the revenues that are generated by the permit fees and by the taxes that we pay. There is a tax on production in New York, just in case anybody didn't realize that. It's a significant tax. The contribution that we make in the form of our permit fees, the taxes we pay on production, the taxes we pay on income in the state, assuming that there'll be opportunity to drill, will help support additional funding for the regulatory agencies so that they can hire additional staff and perhaps over time build up the process. But the bottom line is they will only be permitting that which they actually are capable of fully inspecting and monitoring.
Adam?
Yes, I'm Adam. I'm one of the people videotaping this. It's such a tremendous waste. And I'll ask you kids not to waste any more of our time with dodgy answers and going on and on about the tax face because.
Do you have a question?
I do have a question.
Thank you.
My question again goes back to the credibility of the film. Several people here have already expressed serious concerns about the credibility of the film. And you've responded by saying, well, it seems like you're attacking Shelley. Maybe you should listen to what the experts say in the film. I have basically here, it's like a deception bingo. And I earned bingo countless times of all the interviews in the film. Let's just take the third interview, just Terry Engler, who he's one of these gross, sham apologists.
Question,
My
please.
question comes from a statement, and plenty of people have had time to speak.
And I give you a time constraint. You've got
So
30 seconds.
I would like to know how you support, and Kimberly from the grassroots organization is no longer here. My question pertains to precisely those grassroots organizations. Are there any other pro-fracking grassroots organization people here present? Does people who oppose it identify themselves?
That's not a question for the panel, Adam. Please ask a question for the panel now.
So Terry Engler, who facilitated the financial scamming of Chesapeake, who funds this production, right, is also one of these people whose industry, and energy in depth as well, actually holds conferences telling people how to fight back against grassroots activists. It tells people how to make fake documentaries like this.
Unfortunately, this is a species.
Yes, it is. Officer, please ask Adam and his camera to leave the...
How do you support the credibility of the film? How do you support the credibility of a film that is funded by people who attack the activists who are here speaking to you? How do you back up the credibility of the film when the people funding it?
Adam, let me answer your question. I got the question. I can answer it. Adam, I can answer this question.
Thank you.
Adam, I can answer your question, so let me answer it, okay? The question I think you're asking revolves around the credibility of the film and the people in it.
Yeah.
I think what you have to realize is the film was designed to get you to think. Okay? Gasland. I don't mind you laughing. I mean, there are some things. Well, sometimes you have to take it to a level for people to understand. And I think what you have is, you have a film that was designed to basically take the same tact that Gasland took the other way.
So does Energy in Depth give industry presentations on how to spin the media, or does it not do that?
Joe from Energy in Depth, I'll ask you to answer that question.
I haven't been to any of them, if they do exist. I don't know about them, but I couldn't ask you the same thing about, Earth First, whatever that is, or organizations people who, like yourself, a college kid, right? Or what are you, a grad student, I'm going to assume, if I live with you? Whatever it is, I don't really care. But some people who strap themselves to trees and block hydraulic factory jobs, and then the person hurt themselves. What about that? Don't you guys do things like that?
Listen, I think the...
I'm just saying, you can say something to us, but you can say the same thing to people like you.
Okay, Adam, if you have a question...
Let me say something.
He didn't answer my question.
Officer,
I answered your question. I don't have an answer to your question.
But you can listen online. The answer is that they do hold those conferences.
So why do you listen right now?
Listen, please. All right. These people came here to answer questions. I'm asking they ask them a question. Okay.
Have I not?
Just a second, okay? I'm not pro-fracking. I'm not anti-fracking. I'm here to protect college. This program, this room was reserved for these people to answer questions.
I belong to the college.
I just let me finish. All right? Everybody's going to get their time, okay? I don't care.
So I don't want to take any
No,
yours.
I don't care. I'll shut this whole thing down. I don't care. All right? When people are... Yes, I can. It's on the college campus. I have the right to do that.
And please remember, folks, this is not a college event. This is an event that is privately reserved for this space. It's not a college event. We have a question from this gentleman.
Hi, my name is James Burnett. I'm persona non grata at University of Buffalo, and I'm not a fan of the Shale Institute. I'd like to ask you an economics question. Since you've outrun yourselves in Pennsylvania by overproducing, you don't know what to do with the stuff. You're thinking about liquefying it and shipping it off to, I don't know, Houston or China or wherever. Do you think that it's no longer economically feasible to invade New York? Even T. Boone Pickens is pulling out of the gas game.
Can I answer that? Because
Yeah,
I've been doing business for 30 years in New York, drilling oil and gas wells, and yeah, I want to continue to do business in New York. So that's my simple answer.
Yeah, you want to continue, but have the prices dropped as a result of glut of production, overproduction in Pennsylvania? And are they basically going to have to dump the stuff at below cost and thereby undercut your entire industry? That is, have you tripped over your own shoelaces by overproducing in Pennsylvania?
No, I think what we have as an industry is we have a revelation of the actual value of natural gas as an energy source. And what's happening is we're offsetting some of the other energy supplies that are much more expensive. So the continued growth in the use of natural gas will offset some of that, low pricing. You'll get an increase in demand and the price will adjust. It'll basically level out to the point where things are normally economic. And as an industry person, our job is to basically produce it as inexpensively as we can.
I mean, at some point there's a cutoff.
The low price of natural gas has been a great thing for this nation. We are now the lowest energy input to manufacturing in the world. Natural gas selling at $3 an MCF here versus $14 in Asia, $12 in Europe. It's giving us tremendous competitive advantage in the marketplace right now. Not to mention the savings for everybody that uses natural gas in their heating to their homes. And that's come about because we have developed the technology that has made the largest natural gas reserves in the world now. But as a result of the price being low, the companies have cut back drilling. They are drilling less, producing less. Eventually, supply and demand will come back to balance because we will not be drilling enough wells to replace that, and the price will rise again to the point where it will be more economic. Right now, at $3 an MCF, it is difficult economics, to be sure.
Right, so is it worth coming into New York?
Well, keep in mind that New York State right now imports over 95% of its natural gas needs. So you have a certain balance of economies that you're losing out on right now by having to pay those dollars to jobs that are created in other states. Then look at where New York is going. It's not like the demand is going down. You've got NRG that just announced in Western New York 2 facilities, the one in Fredonia and the other one up in North Tonawanda, that they were talking about mothballing. And there was a great concern expressed about all those lost jobs. And now they're talking about converting those facilities from coal-fired generation for electricity over to natural gas. There's a lot of discussion going on now about what to do with Indian Point. There's a concern about the safety associated with fuel storage and other related issues on nuclear. Where's the discussion going? It's going to natural gas. The answer that is out there right now is if there's going to be additional electricity to supplement the losses here, it's going to come from natural gas. Solar will be a great idea someday. The technology isn't there yet. But the answer to your question is today, what we're dealing with today, natural gas needs are simply going up in the state, not going down. So I agree with everything else.
Energy needs are going up, not necessarily natural gas needs. So what I'm saying is,
unless you're going to burn more coal, the realities are today that you're going to be dealing with natural
We've got
gas.
15 minutes and 5 more questions. Buck, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Pleasure to see you in the same room.
Likewise. Oh dear, this is a little short for me again. Anyway. Well, this one I guess is going out to you there, Dennis. To you on the phone the other day, you ended our conversation by hanging up on me. I just wanted to recap some remarks that you made.
I hope this is the form of a question.
It's a prelude to it, Dennis. We consider New York a pretty significant battleground, so we aren't there yet. We have a governor, I think, that believes this thing should probably move forward. And I'll just give you a couple more quick observations. I made some notes to myself while these gentlemen were speaking. We talked about don't dump the media. Be an information source for them. Develop a rapport. Keep it simple. Don't let the opponents define the issue. Make it your meeting rather than theirs, because they keep it far too superficial. Seek out academic studies and champion with universities, because that, again, provides tremendous credibility to the overall process. We tend to be viewed, as I said earlier, very skeptically. We're aligned with the University of Buffalo. We've done a variety of other activities where we've gotten the academics to sponsor programs and bring in people for public sessions to educate them on a variety of different topics. One last thing. The key in all this is to keep it credible. I'm going to read you a quote to sort of finish up right here, so we still have some time for Q&A. This is an editorial that showed up not too long ago. It says, "Life is about managing risks with sensible protections. Hydrofracking includes certain inherent risks, but so does any exploration for oil and gas, which virtually all New Yorkers use. New Yorkers who insist on never taking any risks should not get into a car, though they could get hit by one while walking, or just stay in bed all day, risking bed sores." I like this quote, obviously. I pulled it out and I bring it along with me. I've told some media folks, you probably think that's coming from somebody in the industry. What you might find sort of fascinating is to find out that this quote actually comes from the Buffalo News, which is a Warren Buffett-owned paper, so it's not known for being overly conservative. A year ago, it endorsed the moratorium on hydrofracking, so this is a major turnaround for this paper. And we spent a good year and longer meeting with editorial boards, providing essays to the paper, and doing whatever we could to educate the reporters on a different perspective than what they've been led to believe until now. So I view this type of turnaround as a major success story, and these are the type of areas that I think can have a tremendous amount of influence. It doesn't matter whether they're going to throw a well in Buffalo or not, but the spread of that information out there has a tremendous impact on the politicians and the other folks that we ultimately have to bring around to understanding that we can do this safely.
Thank you.
This is your agenda, is to manipulate on behalf of the industry, all three of you.
No, I think Buck, those are...
And you, what you are doing.
Make it a question, please. Make it a question.
Make it a question?
Because you got people behind you.
How do you sleep at night?
I'll just observe, since he had the soliloquy, if I get that word out.
It was your word, buddy.
The words I'll stand by. I think what they represent is what we're doing here again tonight. We're taking the time to present the facts, to do it in a reasoned and well thought out manner, and we're giving you the opportunity, whether you choose to listen or not, to understand that maybe a lot of what you've been led to believe is simply not correct.
Question?
That's an interesting act to follow. I did not come here intending to speak. I came here intending to talk because I have a lot of students who follow this closely. I'm a tenured member of the faculty at the law school and do not do energy law, I do not do oil and gas law. I loved the reading of all the laws because, yes, everything we do has all these agencies and all these laws, and people are always stunned to see a web. And I knew when I wrote a footnote that was longer than a page because it was citing all the laws that applied to something that I would deserve tenure when I was in my previous institution. So yes, that's right. One of the things that I'm concerned about, however, is, the statement, tell us about the exemptions, because there is an exemption. There is an exemption under EPAC 2005, and I think that one of the things that's interesting to me, kind of observing this as an academic and not being in the fray, is I'm really interested in making sure that there's full disclosure. I study how environmental law policy is looked at by the media. And there's a wonderful debate that's happening right now in the Society of Environmental Journalists about real science and about things. So that's one of the things I just wanted to say. Am I right in saying that there was an exemption under the Safe Drinking Water Act, to the Drinking Water Act, to the Safe Drinking Water Act under the EPAC 2005? No. Okay, well then can you please, if I give you my email after, can you please exchanged with me because I find that to be very odd. Because I'm reading the statute. So I'm confused. You explained to me a lot, Professor, what it states is an exemption under section 322 is not an exemption. And I'd be interested in hearing that. Because once again, this is not my area, but I do have a question. I know, I'm doing what you're yelling at me for, but I study wetlands law. I just got back from the honor of serving on the United States delegation to the Conference of the Parties on the International Wetlands Treaty, where every 3 years, the 162 members of this treaty from all the countries around the world come together to talk about the importance of doing things to protect wetlands. And I met with scientists from dozens of countries who are talking about energy issues and wetlands. And what they were asking with respect to what the United States is doing on fracking is, why aren't you waiting? Why aren't you getting more science? We, the scientists, are saying, the scientists who are the pure academic scientists, not the scientists who are doing the other types of science. And let's be clear, I work for Henry Williams, I represented development, I'm not against good development, but this is a new area, this is an area that I think that there needs to be more science, and there certainly also needs to be more study of how to regulate it. When I heard the EPA administrator there, I heard her say, we need to regulate it well. I think we need to study how to regulate it well. The environmental law professors are just scratching their heads trying to figure out how to get up with understanding how to recommend regulations on that. So when I'm talking to international experts in policy, law, and science who study wetlands from around the world, who are looking at me representing the United States of America in a big meeting in Bucharest, and saying to me, why aren't you applying the precautionary principle? Why aren't you waiting a little bit? What is the rush? Why is it so urgent to not let this unfold? That's my question.
Well, it has been unfolding for over a century, and we have now drilled and fracked between 1 and 2 million wells. This is a well-developed industry with a very long history, so I'm not sure what you mean by something new. Hydrofracking is not new. Listen, I was one of the implementers of horizontal drilling and fracture stimulation. I think I know a little bit about it.
When did it start?
It is not new. It's simply a combination of horizontal drilling, which we've been doing for decades, fracture stimulation, which we've been doing since the 1940s, and putting them together. It's actually a very much better process than it used to be, because in the past, we would have had to have drilled 32 vertical wells to make the equivalent of 1 horizontal well. 32 to 1. That's 32 pads, by the way, versus 1 pad. So we're now only 4 acres to be able to develop the area that 32 vertical wells would have done. And the massive hydraulic fracturing that was done on vertical wells. We used 1 million pounds of sand and 1 million gallons of water to try to jam that into a 100-foot perforation in a vertical well. Now what we're doing is just using 5 million gallons in a mile-long well bore. Much less distribution per square foot, much less stress on the well bore, a much safer process with very little surface exposure. We are using less chemicals than we ever did in the past when we fracked those 1 million wells. It's a much better, safer process. It is not new. We've already talked about it.
We'll send her the information. Huh?
If you have 100 years of experience between, how can you know the 2005 environment, the Clean Water Act had an exemption?
Sir, you've already asked your question. This gentleman hasn't had a chance.
Sir, it's because you're misinformed. That's the reason. So it's hard to prove a negative. What we'll do is we will provide the professor the information.
My name is this is a short mic. My name is Charlie Tarr. It's spelled Charley space Tarr. You got me? Good. I want to thank Mr. Holbrook for acknowledging the wells drilled adjacent to his children's school. He said there's 2 of them, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I want to ask you straightforward, in the history of all these vertical wells that you've drilled, on how many occasions have you sought variance from the DEC to hyper-compress the casing distances? How many times have you had a client that wanted to have 2 or 3 or 6 or 8 wells on a restricted amount of space? And would you be comfortable in seeking a variance from the DEC to, let's say, put 3 additional wells, vertically stimulated, hydrofractured, on top of 2 existing fractured wells in full production with no clarification of gas? How many times did that happen in the course of your career? Did you frequently obtain such a variance?
Let me take a stab at that, because now you're talking about 2 things that really don't apply. You're talking about vertical wells, and when you're looking at...
I don't give a damn about horizontal hydrofracture right now. I want to talk about this illustrious history of vertical stimulation that you gentlemen keep talking about. So again, on the school grounds, you're showing school grounds, here's the hypothetical. We've got 3 hydrofracture wells.
Schools don't have any spacing requirements.
Okay. No, they don't?
No.
Oh, that's fantastic to know. So you gentlemen would be comfortable then to reduce 726 to, let's say, 3 and change 3 1/4 and frack 3 additional wells? Would you be comfortable with that?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I think the standard DEC casing distance is 726 feet. Are you saying that you're comfortable to compress that to 3 1/4? Or would that bother you? I'm curious because that's occurred, and I wonder if it would bother you to do that.
It all depends. If the wells were already drilled and I can analyze what the stimulation covered in the existing wellbore and how much was recovered from it, and I knew how close I can drill to that and not interfere with that, then that's how I'd satisfy myself of whether or not I can do it. It's basically, an analysis of the historical information from the wells that are already there dictates where you can drill new wells.
And what science dictates at which point you're concerned about casing failure in your existing wells? Again, these are in production, you're not clarifying them in the gas, you're not using the VTEX. At what point are you upset about the pressure you're adding to the field and the potential for casing failure in your existing wells? Again, it's your kid's school. At what point is that concerned?
There's no pressure added to the field unless you go to some secondary or tertiary recovery method. The pressure that's utilized in hydraulic fracturing is utilized to create the fracture and then released. It's like lifting a car with a hydraulic jack. When you turn the jack to release, the car comes down. In the case of hydraulic fracturing, when you stop pumping and release the pressure, the fractures close on the sand, which holds the fractures open.
So in an existing brachiated field, you have no problem with fracking 3 additional wells at a distance of, say, 3 1/4?
It all depends, like I said, on the historical information. If I know what the drainage radius is, and I know what the impacted area of the fractures of the existing wells are, and they say okay, then my answer is okay.
So there's one more question behind you, and then we have 2 people who have follow-ups over here. So we'll take this question next, and then we'll have like 6 minutes.
My question goes back to the beginning when this gentleman mentioned about the exemption given to drillers. And some of the claim what exemption included. Well, I believe in 2005, Dick Cheney slid in the energy bill. And I'll read this as a quote. It's paragraph 1, section 1421D of the State Safe Drinking Water Act. And some things is amended to exclude the underground injection of fluids or propping agents other than diesel fuels pursuant to hydraulic fracturing operations related to oil, gas, and geothermal production activities. My question is, why would Dick Cheney want to do that?
What role did he play at the time? Was he vice president at the time?
You see there's no setbacks for schools, or that there's no distance for casing?
Wait a minute. Let him answer that other question first. Yeah, answer the gentleman who sat down's question first, and we have 2 more questions.
The Dick Cheney question, I don't know why he would do it. That's
your question.
I thought he was vice president at the time, so I don't think he had a legislative role.
Question.
Hey, hi again. I just want to ask a follow-up question about the movie, and this one pertains to the editing of the movie. And in the movie, Professor Terry Engelder says that the fracturing process itself is a process that occurs deep enough in the earth. The Groundwater Protection Council study in 2009 reported no problems in the last 60 years. with frac fluid migrating from the reservoir into the groundwater. But my question is about the editing, because at that point it's cut to the guitar music and it kind of cuts away. But in the full interview, what Professor Engelder actually goes on to say is that, however, the problems emerge largely in the surface operations. The surface operations means largely transportation of water, storage of water. Such things as blowouts do occur. Stray methane, for example, has been a real problem in Dimick. So he's acknowledging that there are stray methane problems in Dimick, but that got cut out, and I was wondering why that was done.
Well, no,
You're asking the wrong people because we did not produce the film, but if you get with Joe later, he can get you in touch with the people who did. John's going to take a stab at it.
I would just, let me make just a little clear answer. If you notice later in the film when she's visiting the gentleman in Dimick, he talks about what happened with the stray gas. He talks about how it was corrected. I wasn't involved in the editing, but there was no intention of leaving anything out. Not that I'm aware of.
They didn't swallow the water they were drinking.
Jim, final question?
No, they didn't. Watch the movie, they don't swallow it.
Jim Holston, I understand that you guys want to walk away from the film. I want to also, if I were in your place.
No, we're sitting right here.
Let me ask you a question about the talk you made on October 31st in Houston last year, Mr. Holbrook. This is the talk that Buck asked you about. You talked about how important it is to your credibility as a fracker to get UB on board. How did you get them on board? Did it involve a money transfer to UB or its affiliate foundations or a promise of a money transfer? And second, as you were getting UB on board for your efforts, did it help to have UB professor of geology, Robert Jacoby, on the Norse Energy payroll, as he was at the time, until September of 2011? Did that ease your negotiations with UB?
Let's see if we can make some sense out of this for you, because you seem to be a little bit confused. The statement that was made, and I think the gentleman Bucky there did a pretty good job of reading most of it, was the importance of the industry giving academia an opportunity to have the facts and to be able to reach conclusions which would instill greater public confidence. Because there's a natural propensity out there to be skeptical of industry. I've commented before that Einstein could be up giving the theories of relativity. There'd be those of you, if he was up here and sponsored by the industry, questioning it. So the point in all that particular statement was that we are looking to work. John and I serve on a public information task force that is geared toward going out, reaching out to various industry. We worked with Jamestown Community College on helping them develop programs so people could learn how to be well tenders and engage in other activities so they could actually get jobs when the industry had those to offer. We've worked with the University of Buffalo. We encouraged them, after sitting down and discussing with their geology department, how to put together a lecture series to give the public the opportunity. We didn't have any role in deciding who they chose to bring in, but we encouraged them to have a better informed public. So this is all about what I would hope most people associated with academia would be looking for, which is the opportunity for the public to get all the facts and to get a full and educated understanding, rather than the hysteria that's been associated with much of the information out there related to this industry.
So that was rather skillful, but it didn't respond to the questions at all. And I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all.
What part are you missing?
The whole question? The whole question? How did you get UB to come on board?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I thought I addressed that. No, I didn't offer them.
Did you offer money to the University of Buffalo?
No.
Or did you suggest that you would? And was your getting UB on board with hydrofracking and this disaster of a shale institute?
Well, now you're editorializing. If you allow me to answer the question, I'll attempt to do so.
Okay, Jim, let him answer.
Okay. No, I think I heard it. All right. So to allow, I heard it.
Second part of the question was,
to finish the
was
question.
it helpful to have Dr. Robert Jacoby, Professor Robert Jacoby, an employee of Norse Energy, on board with you at Norse Energy, and at the same time, a member of the geology department?
I have a high
Did that help
regard,
you
to
out?
answer your question, I have a high regard for Dr. Jacoby. He was not involved at the time when we met with the geology department. The geology department at UB expressed a concern that there was a lot of misinformation coming out from other institutions, particularly in New York State, in central New York, in the Ithaca area, and they wanted to have the opportunity. Are you going to listen now, or are you just going to pout? Good. Okay, thank you.
Answer the question.
So there was a concern that the University of Buffalo had that there was a gap in knowledge. And they felt as an academic institution, there was an opportunity to fill that gap. So what they asked is, what process did we see out there? And John and I were involved in that process.